The last type of mitered square we're going to make is a 5-color mitered square. And this is using the Red Heart Granny All-in-One yarn, which changes color as you go. And if you crochet it into a granny square, the color changes show up as you transition into each round. So you get a different round of each color as you work. But if you knit it into a mitered square, you get this cool striping effect. So when we have 5 colors to work with, it can be a little trickier to identify which is the first color as you work, because when we look at the yarn, now we have 5 colors to deal with, and they're much more even in proportion than the previous Flower Power yarn that we worked with. So one thing you can do is double check the label. If you look on the label, you will see a photo of a granny square, and you'll be able to identify what the color is at the center of the granny square. That's going to be your color number 1. So your ball should start, your skein, at color 1, but if it doesn't, you can just pull out the yarn until you get to that first color and then begin. Now this mitered square is exactly the same as we've been working with the others. The only difference is we're going to have 5 color changes. So just like before, you can keep going and go with the flow, let the colors change as they may, and you may get some slight variation in where the color changes land. Or you can use the tools that we looked at earlier to manipulate the color and adjust just slightly to get perfect stripes. So make all the squares that you need in your 5-color yarn for your size, and then we'll take a look at sewing them together. Now, if we take a look at the assembled body of our patchwork jacket, you'll notice that all of the mitered squares that we've worked, no matter what yarn it was in, are oriented the same way. So your first color, your first stitch, your first row is always in the bottom right-hand corner, and the cast-off row is the top edge and the side edge. So that means we are going to be seaming side edges of stitches to bound off stitches throughout the assembly process. But before you start seaming, you might want to mix things up and try a different orientation for a completely different look. So in your pattern, you'll notice, now it's not quite this big in your pattern, but variations on how you can orient your squares for a different look. Mitered squares are really great for this purpose. You can really get some interesting dynamic looks just by rotating the square. So we have it in the standard, in the photos you see in the PDF, they are all oriented this way. But if you had one like this, next to one this way, next to one this way, you can get some really cool effects. So check that out, and before you start assembling everything together, play around and maybe you can come up with a really interesting, unique design for your patchwork sweater. Let's take a look at the assembly of our knit patchwork jacket. If you take a look in your pattern, you'll notice that there are 3 separate assembly diagrams. So choose the one that coordinates with the size that you're making. This is the extra small, small, medium diagram, and you'll see there's 3 squares across, 3, 3, 3, and 7 down. And for the body of this particular size, there are going to be additional panels picked up and worked along the side, but we're not going to worry about that yet. That's going to come later. The second size, the large, extra large size, looks slightly different. We've got the same layout as the previous size, but we've got these extra squares on the side. Now this represents half a square. You can see the dotted line here. And that might be a little bit tricky to wrap your head around seeing that flat. So I've cut a piece out here so that you can understand what it looks like when it's assembled. So it's not like you're cutting your mitered square in half. It's just this mitered square continues over here because it's folded. So here you can see I've got exactly the same diagram. I've just cut it out. And when I fold it, you can see at the sides, that's my solid colored mitered square, and it's attached to this side. And when you fold it over, it's attached to the back there. So for this size only, when you assemble, you are also seaming the sides because we're attaching our mitered square to this side, both the front and the back. So for this size only, your front and your back side seams will also be created as you're assembling your body. And then for our last size, it's fairly straightforward again. We just have a complete additional row of squares. These are the sleeves. We're going to take a look at that later. But for now, let's talk about seaming our squares with a flat seam. Okay, let's take a look at seaming. So when we're joining our mitered squares together as they're oriented in the assembly diagram, we have a cast off row on one edge and sides of stitches on the other edge. And the instructions have you seam together with a flat seam. So the easiest and most straightforward way to do a flat seam is with whip stitch. So let me show you how to do that. Now, I've woven in the ends on these swatches, but if I didn't, I would have a yarn tail over here and over here, and you can use those to sew your pieces together if they're long enough. Now, I like to do whip stitch oriented this way, so that's how we're going to take a look at it. Now, if you're using your yarn tail to sew things together, you can skip this step, but I'm going to show you the figure 8 join for joining a new piece of yarn when you're making seams. So I'm using a contrast color so that you can see exactly what I'm doing, but obviously you'd want to match either the blue or the yellow, match one of your squares so that the seam is less visible. So what you want to do is get your length of yarn and find the very corner stitch. I'm going to be sewing into the ridges, the stitch, one stitch at the edge of each garter ridge as I'm going up on this side. So I'm going to find the bottom one and I'm going to bring my yarn up through from the back, the wrong side, to the right side. I should mention my right side of my squares are facing. Okay, so I've gone back to front on this side and I'm going to pull a tail through, and I'm leaving a tail just long enough that I can weave that in later. Then on the other side, I'm going to find my corner stitch. Now, because this is the right side and we bound off with, or cast off with the wrong side facing, that means that that ridge, that nice ridge that looks like a chain of my cast off, lies to the wrong side of the work. So I'm just going to flip that up so I can see it a little bit better. And I'm going to insert my needle again from the wrong side to the right side, from back to front, through both sides, both of that, that nice little chain stitch. And I'm going to bring that up. Now I'm going to come back to the other side and I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I'm going to come back through the same stitch and also from back to front. And before I pull that tight, you'll see if I kind of flip it flat, it looks like a number 8. So that's why that's called the figure 8 join. But if I zip it together there, I can pull both ends to tighten it a little bit. I've got just this one little neat bar, this section going across, attaching my the first stitches together and keeping them in alignment, and it keeps my yarn tail in place so that I can begin seaming. So now all we're going to do is work all the way up, joining the edge stitch at each garter ridge on this side, and we're going to be joining by working through each of these stitches, which look like chains now, these bound off stitches, and we're going to be working through both sides of that chain. I'll bring that a little closer so you can see. So we're going to be working through right there. All right. So now that I've got my figure 8 join, and it will come loose, you can tighten it again. Don't worry about it. So now I'm going to come from the right side to the wrong side, from front to back through the next bound off stitch, and also up through that bar or stitch at the edge of my garter stitch row or garter stitch ridge. Now I'm not going to pull it tight yet so that we can see what's happening here. Then I'm going to come again from the right side to the wrong side through my next bound off stitch, and you can do this one step at a time. I'm just trying to get into a nice flow here by going through both sides at once. I'm going through my side on the right, through my bound off stitches, and then through that edge stitch of my garter ridge. And let's pull that through and keep it loose. Now you'll notice, if you remember, that a garter ridge is 2 rows, and I'm working 1 stitch to 2 rows as I'm seaming. But those are the proportions of garter stitch. Garter stitch gauge is typically about twice as many rows tall as it is stitches wide, if that makes any sense. So it ends up working out evenly. Also make sure that as you're coming up through your garter ridges, that you're always picking the same stitch. So if I take a look closely at the edge of my garter ridge, I've got that upper sort of umbrella shaped stitch, and then I've got the lower smiley stitch, the one that like a letter U, and that's kind of half of a stitch right there of an upper one. You need to be consistent and pick up the same one each time. I'm picking up that smiley letter U shaped bar. So I'm coming through each stitch on the right and the side of each ridge on the left, all the way to the top. Now, if you don't tighten it before you get to the end of your seam, it might be a little more difficult to do. So I'm going to start tightening this up. And you can tighten as you go. I just wanted to make sure that you could see my stitches as I work. So I'm just going to tighten that up. If I was doing it all along, I wouldn't have to pull each stitch like this. You can just do that. And then you end up with these little diagonal stitches. If they are in the same color, they're going to blend in. And they'll look just great. Now, the nice thing about this seam, I'll just do one more and we'll stop there, is that it looks the same on either side. So here I have these little diagonal stitches, and I have the same thing on the other side. And it's quite strong, and it's very flexible, and it doesn't add a lot of bulk to your finished garment. So go ahead and get your yarn needle and your assembly diagram and all your squares and sew together the body according to the layout in the diagram, the assembly diagram for your size. For week 2, make all of your 5 colored mitered squares in Red Heart all-in-one granny square. That will be 12, 13, or 18 squares depending on your size. Then, using your assembly diagram, sew all the squares together that you need to create your body using a flat seam. Happy knitting, and see you next time.